The session chair is Dr. VivekLall, Chief Executive, US and International Strategic Development, General Atomics, USA. Mr. Lall is a global leader in nuclear and high-end defense technologies. He is based at their corporate headquarters in San Diego, California, since 2014. He has been engaged with US and international governments and businesses to increase the General Atomics footprint across the various defense and commercial product lines. He routinely interacts with several world leaders in different continents to create win-win partnerships. Before GA, he worked with Reliance Industries Limited as president and CEO. Prior to Reliance, he held numerous leadership roles in marketing and engineering at Boeing in the United States and India since 1996. He led a team to conclude the path-breaking and largest ever US-India defense deals for C-17 strategic lift, P-8I anti-submarine warfare aircraft, and Harpoon missiles. Dr. Lall, thank you so much for agreeing to chair this session. Our panelists, I would like to invite you one by one. Mr. Pratyush Kumar, President, Boeing India, Vice President, Boeing International. Pratyush Kumar, known to many as Pratt, also serves as Managing Director of Boeing Defense India. Based in New Delhi, he is Boeing's most senior in-country executive who integrates and advances Boeing's activities in India across its three business units: Boeing Commercial Airplanes, Boeing Global Services, and Boeing Defense, Space and Security. Before joining Boeing in 2012, he served in various leadership roles at GE for close to a decade in the United States and in India. He started his career as a consultant with McKinsey & Company in the US. Between McKinsey and GE, he was an entrepreneur working at a US high-technology startup, Coventa, and founding a Boston-based biotech company, Cytonome. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a panelist at this session, Mr. Pratyush Kumar. Our next panelist, Mr. NikKhanna, Managing Director of BAE Systems India Operations since February 2017. India is a strategically important market for the company, and NikKhanna is responsible for leading the company's growth strategy anchored in a focus on Make in India. Prior to joining BAE Systems, he was India Country President for Raytheon Company, where he led business development, marketing, strategy, and partnership efforts from 2013 to 2017. Prior to that role, he was Director of Aerospace and Defense at the US-India Business Council, leading policy and customer advocacy initiatives for the US defense and aerospace industry. He began his career with American Management Systems, where he held key positions in business analysis and strategy, business process re-engineering, and change management. He's a graduate of James Madison University with a bachelor's degree in computer information systems. Mr. NikKhanna, thank you so much for agreeing to be a panelist here. Our next panelist is Mr. Emmanuel de Roquefeuil, Vice President and Country Director, India, Thales. He was appointed to this post in February 2017. In his current role, he is responsible for leading and driving Thales's growth in the country and also realizing the group's overall goal of Make in India and Export from India. Prior to this appointment, Emmanuel served as VP Sales and Marketing for Optronics and Missile Electronics at Thales. In this role, he was responsible for the setting up of Optrolead, a joint venture between Thales and SAAB. He has majored in missile space from Supero, Toulouse, and undertaken the program for Master of Business Administration from INSEAD. He also holds a master's degree in Public Law and Industrial Strategy and Defense from CHEAR Sorbonne, Paris. Mr. Roquefeuil, thank you so much for being a part of this session. We need one more chair, please. We need one more chair, please. We have another panelist. Mr. Jan Widerstrom, Chairman of SAAB India Technologies. Sir, while your chair is being brought, let me quickly introduce you. Mr. Widerstrom is working with SAAB India Technologies Private Limited as chairman. He has worked with SAAB in India earlier from 2008 to 2010 as chairman. This is his second stint in India. Prior to his current role, he was working as head of campaigns with SAAB Dynamics and was responsible for their campaigns in India. He has worked on various SAAB projects in different parts of the world, such as Italy, US, Belgium, Singapore, France, Germany, and Asia Pacific. In his current role as chairman of SAAB India, he is responsible for the marketing and business development activities of SAAB in India. Sir, thank you so much for being a part of this panel discussion. I hand over the session to the session chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Is it on? Just check, mic check.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, we have a very eminent set of folks on the stage. I think my job is pretty much done because everyone has been announced and everyone's background has been shared with you. And I think what's most productive in these types of sessions is the interaction. But we have 10 to 12 minutes for each of the speakers to elaborate their points of view that would be relevant to this August gathering here today. And I have some comments to make on this topic myself, which I'd like to do at the end before we open it up to the audience for interaction. So with that, I think the guidance from the organizers is 10 to 12 minutes per speaker. And first I'd like to have Brad from Boeing to
Thank you, Chairman. I think the topic of this session the topic of this session is the models for defense industry in different parts of the world. And I'd like to kind of address that kind of head on. Defense industry has a unique structural challenge. The structural challenge is that you tend to have your major customer as being one. So MOD, for example, in India, you have one customer, MOD, who sets the policy for procurement and sets the requirements and also is responsible for creating the whole ecosystem. Now, the second structural constraint I would put is that the requirement, the technology for developing platforms for defense systems is very advanced. It takes years and often billions of dollars to develop. So, a lot of capital required, a lot of know-how, R&D work required to get the technology to market. So you add the two. One customer, huge amount of investment, long time to develop, very high technology. So what does it lead to? Does it lead to an open market situation where multiple firms can compete and find multiple customers? Not so easily. So in a country like United States, which has the scale and requirements, they can afford to compete multiple companies and have multiple vendors for the same platform. It kind of works, and even there it requires a lot of nurturing and helping hand of the government, especially in the R&D stage. The DoD does a lot of seeding of advanced technology through DARPA, which not only benefits the defense industry, but more broadly. And then it co-invests with defense companies to develop technology and nurtures over time, which often takes tens of billions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And their scale allows them to really have scope for multiple vendors for each of the sectors to compete and survive for the long haul. Outside of the United States, if you look around, most countries have essentially one chosen partner for the respective area. One for aerospace, one for naval system, one for major land systems. There isn't a lot of multiple vendor situation in each of the countries. And the reason for that is quite simple. It's addressing the constraints that we outlined. One buyer, sporadic purchases, huge investment required, talent base. Then how do you ensure that it's economically price discovered in a way which is competitive and driven? So in a lot of the countries outside of the US where you have basically one vendor or one type of platform or one vertical, really it tends to be a partnership between the public enterprise and the private enterprise. The public could be the government funding some of the R&D work, or government supported industrial partnering with the private enterprise, and that's how it evolves, right? So as we look forward in India, as we try to co-opt the private enterprise, in India, if you look at the last 70 years, or 75 years since even independence, most of the heavy lifting in defense manufacturing has been done by the public enterprise. And now we're opening the space for private enterprise to co-opt into this. The agenda is very ambitious. We're talking about a strategic partnership model, which will allow the private industry to participate. Frankly, we got to think about it a little bit carefully. How much space is for how many competitive private industries to participate and thrive and survive beyond the immediate production run. And if you decide to build a production business plan on immediate production run, I can tell you it doesn't close. Even in our case, when we set up a simple joint venture to manufacture Apache fuselage, there was no chance that it could have closed just based on India volumes, right? So you have to co-opt the exports to actually make sure it closes. So, to be seen, how do you actually build a scenario where multiple private enterprises can compete with public with the scale that India has and sustain that model for long term? There has to be perhaps a hybrid looking at our situation. So that's something that policymaker will have to think about and take into consideration as this journey progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Prat, for those excellent comments to set the stage and that global experience base, so that I'm sure there'll be discussion after all the panelists have talked. I'll now like Nick to please give his comments.
Thanks, Vivek. Let me start by thanking Nitin for inviting me here. This is a really timely opportunity, I think. I'll just, at the outset, you'll just have to bear with me. I'm just coming off of a really bad illness with a bad throat. So if I begin to croak and just reach for the water here, just actually bear with me for a second there. But partnerships are partnerships in defense technology production are an important aspect of the international defense and security space. And I'll just pick up actually by building upon Prat's point. It's absolutely vital to everything we do here. It absolutely underpins what we have been doing here as a company for several decades. Within the air sector, clearly, we were one of the first movers in terms of providing frontline fighters to the Indian Air Force, dating back to the Second World War, with aircraft carriers, the two Western aircraft carriers, INS Virat, of course, the Sea Harriers, which were recently decommissioned. And we're very proud to call ourselves a founding partner for defense manufacturing in India. When you look back at the extraordinary long journey we have with Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, with Jaguar production that began in the late 1970s, and of course continued with Hawk, 2004, 2010. In fact, Jaguars were still being produced out of that partnership which we created close to 40 years ago, as recently as 2007. So you look at a long-standing legacy here, and partnerships with both the public sector and the private sector have absolutely underpinned how we have looked at this extremely important market. It's a customer, it's a partner, and now increasingly more, India and Indian companies are important suppliers to us for our global supply chain. But getting back to Prat's point, the group of us here, all of us on this panel, are all deeply involved in, I think, recommending and sharing some of these best practices, some of the lessons learned, some of the challenges which we've experienced around the world, decades of doing partnerships in defense technology, so that we can move the needle on important policies. You heard Prat mention a few of those. FDI is one of them. Make in India is absolutely at the core of it. You've got the advent of the strategic partnership model now, which sort of builds more into the private sector. And customers value partnerships because it addresses several core national objectives. It addresses the objectives of self-reliance. It addresses needs of indigenous production capability, scale, but it also addresses the kind of key sort of area that we're now moving into, which is, will the private sector, in combination with or on its own, be able to cope with the kind of volume that we're talking about? I think that's a concern that all of us would equally share. But it's not so much a concern. It's really, how do we now really get into that next paradigm? And I think that's where the country's really headed. So, you know, we've got a long record of successful partnerships in our home markets, clearly in the United Kingdom, in the United States, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Japan, Denmark, France, Australia, just to name a few. And just to give you a few examples. So with the UK and the French government, along with companies there, we're working on a future unmanned combat aerial system to develop 2 operational prototypes. With Brazil, we're working closely with the Navy there to do an assured warship production, and we're working with Brazilian industry there. In Norway, we're part of a massive campaign to do a comprehensive industrial cooperation program and a land vehicle program. In Japan and South Korea, where we've got decades of experience, we're co-producing elements of the Mark 45 gun for their 127mm naval gun opportunity. And we've given the same assurances to the Ministry of Defense and to the Indian Navy here. And again, we're in touch with BHEL here to look at how we might take that opportunity forward. And over 100 years of fighter design, development, engineering, and capability, we've now seen that those relationships, those partnerships, have become increasingly complex. They've become increasingly international in nature. So for instance, with the FCAS program, which I mentioned, where the lead on programs like SAAB, we've got a long relationship, of course, with SAAB, where at one point we even had a stake in the company. So for instance, on programs like Gripen, we're in a support role with the Boeing, of course, on programs like the T-45 and on the AV-88B for the United States Marine Corps. We're in a support role in the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program with Lockheed Martin and with Northrop Grumman. We are again in a support mode, but we do 15% of that program. We do design and the manufacture of the aft fuselage and the empennage, and we do the electronic warfare suite. And then, of course, with programs like Jaguar, Tornado, Eurofighter Typhoon, it's a partnership of equals. So you don't have a one-size-fits-all, I think. You've got technology and trusted partnerships that have developed over decades of experience. It's also led to decades of trust between us and the users. For instance, us and the Royal Air Force. This is a hand-in-glove partnership between a BAE Systems and the Royal Air Force as the end user operator. With the Indian Air Force, again, we've got a relationship with them that really dates back to the Second World War. Hawk is the main training platform for the Indian Air Force today. So when you look at all of that, and then you look at where we're now trying to move in the private sector with we're choosing Mahindra for the assembly integration and test for the M777 program, that takes us into some really exciting new areas. Now that's just one piece of it, but we've looked at about 38 Indian companies. And it goes back to some of those things Pratt was talking about. It's a long, enduring exercise to choose companies based on fit, based on capability. You've got to have a business case attached to it. You've got to be able to find the right mix in terms of some of those suppliers and some of those partners, where with just our offset investment of over 200 million, we will be working across the value chain here with the Indian industry. And that will give further opportunities to those companies to get into our global supply chain. So if I can wrap up by just sort of adding a few sort of essential ingredients of what makes truly enduring defense industrial partnerships. I've already mentioned desired capabilities. You have to find the desired capabilities. Number two, it has to be mutually beneficial. You have to sit down with your partners, and there has to be value add on both sides. You've got to be able to look at it, and you've got to be able to spend enough time on that business case where it must pass muster with our Indian partners, with their boards, and then of course back with us. It has to have potential for long-term success, where you might have gone off, but if I'm audible, then that's fine. I'll just continue talking till. Yeah. You have to look at the long term, and you have to have potential for long-term success. So even if you might begin with a certain offset partnership, for instance, and you've got a certain work share defined, and you've got work packages, you can look across the long term and you could look at some other areas. You've got to have a fit and a match between cultures, adherence to ethics, adherence to a corporate governance, employee safety, other things like that. So when we look at partners, we do look for a match in terms of compatible business cultures and shared values. And then I think last but not least, you have to look at whether the partnership is going to be strategically advantageous. So again, it's beyond just the partnership and the work scope and the work share and sort of niche capabilities that the company is bringing you for certain programs. But is there a long-term strategy advantage where you're not just building in India for India, but you're building in India for the export market? And then that gets us all into the next paradigm. And that's where we all want to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for the explanation of the global footprint of BAE and how your partnerships have been working out and the lessons learned that could be applied in this market. So really appreciate that. And now I'd like to turn to Emmanuel to give his comments, please. And I'd like a couple of mics on the stage. Yes, absolutely.
Which ones? You don't want to do anything wrong.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong. That's
Here, the first one.
and this is the PPT. So which is
Okay.
the one you want to use? Does he want the PDF or does he want the PPT?
We can use the PPT if you wish. No, it's okay. But
This is the PDF, is it? Okay.
does that show? Yeah. Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you. Well, thank you, my colleagues from BAE and Boeing, to have introduced this notion of partnership, notion of critical mass, of course. Of course, we are subject to that as well as a Thales company, as a big defense company. No. Anyway, just take a little time just to introduce how we play Thales not only in France but in Europe. First of all, if you see those quick figures, Thales 64,000 employees worldwide, 15 billion euro as a turnover, and my only point is the innovations, the self-funded R&D. So 5% of it is devoted to R&D, which is self-funded, which means that the other part is funded by our customers, be it through programs or be it through R&D directly financed by the MODs, which we are playing with, which we are our customers. We see ourselves as a global company, and therefore being local in a certain number of countries. And in each of those countries where we have defense, therefore strategic sort of relationships, it's clear that that defense relationship is also fed by a certain number of R&D finances from the countries. And this is more or less where I want to go. The strategy of a group like Thales, and I guess it's nothing different from people like Boeing or BAE or SAAB, is driven by innovation. And when you look at innovation, of course, you look at long-term planning. You look, of course, at self-funded R&D. We have 25,000 people, therefore 1/3 of our workforce, which is really working in research and development, research and technology. And it's clear that for all that workforce to be able to work and to invent the future, we need financing, and that finance is always coming from the customer. The rule of the game is to invent tomorrow's product, of course, today. And what we feel and what we are really thinking as a good model in Europe is an open dialogue, because if you want to plan the products of tomorrow, you need to foster an open dialogue between the forces, the industry, and the MODs. This is the way it works in France, this is the way it works in Europe, and we would like it to be also the way it could work also in India, i.e. an open dialogue where everybody is, of course, playing its own part, but you cannot really plan the product of tomorrow without having a discussion today. And as you can see, the arrows are duplex. I mean, industry talking to the force are talking to the MOD, and of course the MOD is also talking to the industry. Every part, every member of the dialogue is playing its own part. You need to have a strong industry, of course, working in its ecosystem of M&E. We are dealing with sovereignty, therefore we have to have a strong industrial capability and to maintain those in order to keep those capabilities for the future. Innovation is really the critical factor, and therefore we need to share investment with the startups, the ecosystem, the DGAs, the MODs, and ourselves, of course. And if we can, because defense, as of today, is also taking a lot of synergy from civil activities, if we can get defense technology out of the civil, I mean, please do it. Of course, to rule that game, you need to have a qualified authority, i.e. the MOD, the DGA. It's very important to look long term. I mean, in those kind of technologies, you have to look at 10 years, 20 years, maybe even 30 years sometimes. And you have to have a regular dialogue between all the parties. And you need to co-invest. It's clear that the industry needs to invest, but it's obviously very important as well that the MODs invest with the industry, be it public or private. Now, how do we put that in place? Or we try to put that in place in India. In India, Thales has been there for nearly 70 years, so 1953. We've been active, we share with BAE Systems the same commitment with the Jaguar, because it was actually a partnership between France and UK with India. We have close to 500 employees now, and we are active in both civil and defense, civil transportation essentially, but not only today. We are in big data analytics, we are in artificial intelligence, and of course in defense, where we are serving, I guess, all the three services, be it the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy. We have joint ventures with public or with private companies. In terms of private, I would name Samtel Avionics. I would name also L&T. In terms of public, I would name Bharat Electronics. Bharat Electronics has been actually the first partner of Thales, of Thomson CSF at the time, in India when we came here. We are proud of caring about social responsibility as well. And we are caring about our links with the universities, because not only technology of tomorrow is important, but of course human resources of tomorrow are fairly important. And we care at nurturing them through common financing between the industry and our government. Main activities in India, you know them. I will not go too deeply into those. How do we see the Make in India? The Make in India for us is a question of energizing the defense sector, the defense economy, via reforms, via the reforms that India has put in place through the DPP, through the foreign direct investment, evolving into a major defense exporter. And of course, defense exporter means competitiveness, means access to foreign markets, and companies like us who have a global reach, we can absolutely facilitate this kind of exports. It's also allowing not only the public industry, but also the private industry to play a role in the defense tomorrow. It's making sure that through careful planning, we put at the disposal of the forces cutting-edge technologies, totally adapted to the crisis of today, or tomorrow, essentially. And it's transforming India hub into a global innovation and manufacturing hub. So this is typically what Thales is striving to do within India. I would name some examples. In the Mirage 2000 upgrade, where Thales is prime, we are dealing in a very close coordination with HL, so therefore with the public industry. And we have been modernizing those Mirage 2000, 60 of them. The first 11s have been done in terms of initial operation capability by Thales through close collaboration with HL. The 50 latest one will be done under the chairmanship of HL, with, of course, the support of Thales. So it's a way we create that partnership, initializing, I would say, the operational capability, and therefore in collaboration, and making sure that our partner can step on and take the leadership of this kind of major programs. Today with Bell and within our joint venture with Bell, BTSL, we are now developing, so design and developing Pharos radar, which is a multi-tracking radar which will be adaptable for Indian Air Force and also naval forces tomorrow in India. And also, Make in India is also sourcing from India. The group, as you can see, is a major group, 15 billion. Yesterday we were sourcing quasi 0.1% in India. Today we are sourcing 1%, 70 million. And we are aiming at sourcing at least 3% in India, 3 to 5%, i.e. between 200 and 250 million out of India, where we are absolutely now convinced that we have good partners, good manufacturers in components, in LRUs, in subsystem, and this is clearly what we are trying to develop in India. It's absolutely essential before, of course, creating strong partnerships. As in a nutshell, India is one of our three priority countries for Thales to develop in India. Our objective here as Thales is, of course, to sell in India, to develop in India, but also to export from India. And Thales India is, I can tell you, totally devoted to that. That was my message.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for that very comprehensive summary on not only Thales' footprint, but also some of the prescriptions from your perspective to make increased collaborations in the country. With that, I'd like to invite Jan to please give any comments in the audience.
Thank you, Vivek. Generals, ladies and gentlemen, and Bharat Shakti, thank you so much for inviting me to speak in this forum. I would like to start by play the role of the devil's advocate to a certain point, and partly also repeat what Pratt was mentioning earlier. Let's do a reality check here to start with. Having experienced the sort of growth and the startup and the liberalization of the Indian defense industry, you have to sort of look globally. And I think what the previous speakers on the other sessions, I think if there's one thing that has been put out clearly here is that for the Indian defense industry to grow, and I would say particularly on the tier 1, tier 2 level, export is a necessity. But then if you're going to go out to this export market, the jungle where at least the rest of us here are fighting and cooperating. It's quite amazing, and Nick mentioned here as well, we are all cooperating sometimes, and sometimes we compete. If I take some of the key areas within the defense high-tech technologies, look at, for instance, electronic warfare. I would say there's about a handful companies in the world, the global market. The Indian defense procurement budget is give and take 10 billion. 30% is occupied already by the Indian industry, remains about 7 billion. The global market is by far bigger than that. So on this market, we have about 5 or a handful global companies. I could easily count to more than 5 in India who claims they will be or are going into the electronic warfare field. Same thing goes for radars. On the global arena, looking at Thales here, looking at myself, others, about a handful which are competing head-to-head on the global arena. Again, in India, you can see about the same number or more saying that, yes, we can do this and we can compete. I can go on with missiles, fighters, submarines. So, having a look at that, then if India is going to succeed with all these, it means that you will double the the production capability and the R&D capability of the global capability today. So that's probably not going to happen. So what do we need to do about it then? First of all, I must say one of the things that make me, I would say, love this country and love working here and why I've stayed here for, 12, 13 years now, is the fact that you have this entrepreneurship. The fact that there are 5 companies in India saying that, yes, we're going to go into the electronic warfare field, I think that's great. And probably at least one of those guys will be successful. And I think that's the key here. And so the entrepreneurship, the willingness is definitely here. And the first question here was, are India ready? I think they are, definitely, 100%. It's more the question, does India have the business case? Does the Indian companies have the business case and the funding to drive? They have the technology or the knowledge to acquire or to give the technology. I mean, this country is producing PhDs and engineers like no other country in the world. So that's not an issue. And I mean, that's why we are moving a lot of our R&D, setting up development capabilities in the country as we speak. Having said that, so what to do about it? I think that most of the things have been said. I will repeat it again. Partnership is definitely one area which is key. Another thing is to, with reference to the question asked on the previous session, is creating an Indian footprint or an Indian hub for our global supply chain. And from that, I think India would grow into being the exporter of defense in the defense material globally. And that's also something that we are aiming at doing. And probably there's a lot of talk about manufacturing and production. I think the R&D component here is extremely important. When China was growing in the 90s, maybe not in defense, but in other areas, it was because made in China was possible at that time. Unfortunately, times has changed. So today I would see the made in India to be sort of conquering the world will be more difficult. But one thing I'm sure India can do, and based on our own experience and what we are doing and what we are growing rapidly, is the R&D sourcing out of India. Why can't we copy the IT wonder, the services wonder of India into defense R&D? We are doing it, and I must say it doesn't require as much investments as setting up industrial production. It is, you have the manpower, you have the capabilities to do so. So I think one area where I think, from a global OEM perspective, is that if the Indian government can help to incentivize the sort of built up of a R&D services hub in India, that would be extremely, I think that would be the quick fix. And of course, one of the things that I'm aiming at right now is the 20% cap on offsets on services related to R&D. But I think despite that, it could still grow, it could multiply, because that's a quick fix. Another thing that has been mentioned here is sort of how to succeed. And I'm again going to go back to the R&D part. We as a company, we're putting back between 25 to 30% of our R&D, of our turnover into R&D. And I believe that's the kind of numbers you need to be able to produce to be ahead always on that global competitive arena, because I'm sure my colleagues here, they're probably doing something similar. So to beat them, I have to put in even more, be a little bit better. So, and find means of partnership. I'll take a good example. I mean, if we look at Boeing here, for instance, we are now, as we speak, developing the next generation advanced jet trainer. So the question is, why would we cooperate with Boeing, or even better so, why would Boeing ask SAAB for support and partnership on their own home market. Because everyone can't do everything, and you need to find your niches. Obviously, we're adding some value there, so that's why SAAB and Boeing is developing the next generation advanced fighter trainer in US. So, and I think that's another area where Indian companies can play an extremely important role. Find your niche, don't try to do everything, but do what you're good at and focus on that, and then from there, you can grow and you can expand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. So I think you mentioned a very important thing here, because you heard.
Toss on the
I
mic.
think you mentioned a very important thing here, and in terms of finding your niche and expertise, and not everyone can do everything, and collaborate. So just picking up on that theme, I think all of the panelists here have large companies with large footprints in many countries. But I'd like to ask Pratt, Boeing being the largest aerospace company in the world, and a leader that everyone follows and tries and mirrors. What is your experience globally that could be applicable in India in terms of developing a tier 2 or a tier 3 supply chain? And because there are many people in the audience who'd like to know from an Indian industry perspective, what are some of the things they can be doing differently or better to enable them to come up the value chain?
Well, thank you, Vivek. Boeing does have a very deep and broad experience with supply chain globally. I think our deepest experience is Japan, where we do a lot of work with the commercial airplanes, with very well developed ecosystem with Japanese heavy industries. And then we have significant experience in Korea, in Israel, in Western Europe. So many parts of the world, we have done a lot of industrial development. I think here are the 2 or 3 things that I might be suggesting to our Indian partners. And today we already have 160 Indian partners. So they are co-opted to this model already. So first and foremost is that when you look into getting into aerospace supply chain, look for sources of value. A lot of the times, our Indian partners get wrapped up around offsets. If you chase offsets, that's a sure path to failure. I can guarantee you today, if you come and talk to me and say, hey, I want to do it because I want to be offset partner, I can tell you, don't, because you will not succeed. But if you come to us and say, we want to become a long-term part of your global supply chain by delivering value, which means productivity, quality, and delivery, and innovation, and compete at the global scale with Japanese and the Koreans, I think you're in. I can tell this room unequivocally that all 160 of our partners in India are doing just that. They're delivering quality, productivity, and on-time delivery at par with a Mitsubishi Heavy or a KAI or a Thales or someone, right? Like that, right? So number 1 thing is just look for source of value. Number 2, I'll say is that as we look for the opportunity in the Indian defense sector, in our, I would say, informed view, having done business cases many times, and as Jan was saying, it's not the lack of talent or know-how or technology adoption capacity, it's often the lack of a good business case that gets in the way, right, of getting into being a big supplier to Indian defense services. I think it's very critical to co-opt the export and domestic market. If you don't co-opt the two, the business case, actually in our case, today we're doing about $1 billion of sourcing from India, doesn't compute, it doesn't close. So you gotta bring the two together to close the business case. Just because the initial investment is so large, just because the payback period is long, just because the technology takes so much time to build. So you got to co-opt the two. So that's the second piece. The third thing I'll say that many of the new entrants are I would say, particularly for aerospace and defense, not broadly defense, but for aerospace sector, have pretty deep experience in other sectors like automotives, or may they be a small and medium industry who are already supplier to other sectors, and very successful. But while it might seem like a small step from automotive to aerospace, because in automotive, Indian companies are very successful at a global scale. But that small step, it actually turns out to be a giant leap, because in automotive, you work in a gold standard platform, which is basically Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a gold standard in automotive, which by definition accepts the few parts per million of defect. Aerospace is zero defect manufacturing. That jump from Six Sigma to aerospace zero defect manufacturing is not a simple jump. I'm looking at my good friend and colleague Colonel Bhatia here, at Bharat Forge, who had made that jump, but it's not been easy or trivial. It's required a lot of investment and a lot of absorption of know-how and processes to get that right. So those are the three things I would mention to my partners here who want to get into global supply chain.
Thank you, Prat, for those excellent comments. Since the audience has a lot of defense attachés and people in uniform, I'd like maybe our speaker, Emmanuel from Thales, to address what do you see the role of governments in developing your partnerships in India and other countries? In other words, your government and in the government of India, what are some of the steps they can take to further enhance this cooperation among companies?
Well, in my presentation, for me, the key slide was actually the open dialogue, therefore the triangle between the forces, the MODs, and the industry. I guess my colleagues will not contradict me, but we are acting in long-term planning. The planning is obviously something which comes from the MODs, because you are defining with the forces your needs of tomorrow. We are developing products, of course, for the world market, but very often also we're developing products which are adapted to the markets in which we are operating. And one of the key that the industry is really looking at is capitalizing on a presence in a defined market in order to share the investment for the products of those markets. And in order to share those investments, we need to have a discussion, we need to have an open dialogue. We need to discuss, for example, here in India with the DRDO, but with a long-term view. And if I have an advice here in India, beyond the Make in India that has been put forward recently through the DPP 2016, I would encourage an open dialogue between the various partners, be it the forces, be it the MOD, be it the DRDO, and with an objective really to share planning, resources, and products.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Nick, if I could ask you a question in terms of development of new platforms for the India market. So as an example, BAE has a large footprint that you went through. If India is indeed this big market that all of us have talked about, and we want to develop supply chains, what is holding back some of the larger companies from actually designing and developing a platform for the India market that is unique to the India market because you have very specific conditions, as the uniform people will tell you, but high and hot conditions, etc. That's nowhere in the world except India. So where do you see some of the barriers in terms of developing a next generation platform in India for India?
Thanks, Vivek. I think that's a very nice way of asking about FICV. Because that is, sort of exactly what it is. It's a very unique requirement for the Indian Army. I think the Indian Army decided a long time ago that they didn't want an existing platform. They looked at the platforms in the U.S. We were one of the earliest companies to be able to engage with the Indian Army to look at what we've done for the United States Army, of course, what we've done for the British Army over decades of designing armored fighting vehicles for them, infantry fighting vehicles of the same class, category, requirements in terms of needing to be amphibious, needing to be light, needing to have the right mobility and the right weapon systems, and of course survivability. So I think FICV is that kind of program where the Army said we want something absolutely unique. We want something that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We want you to work with Indian companies within a Make India program and design and develop something that is absolutely unique. Hence, we have the whole program as it's structured today to be able to work with our India Prime companies. And so that's been a long-standing program, and I think I will look at our colleagues from the armed forces, the General Duas here, and others. This has been a long-standing program. I think we've done a lot of good work in terms of what we've structured in terms of our capabilities that we've brought. So, we've obviously partnered with Mahindra on that. There are other consortia that are a part of the playing field. But we bring decades of design development expertise in designing vehicles for armies across the world, obviously largely for the United States Army and for the British Army. But we bring a lot of experience in terms of integrating sensors, weapon systems, and other capabilities like ATGM onto those kinds of vehicles. So I think we're just eager to take that forward, see what the next step is from the MOD in terms of where that program goes. There's also the Future Reconnaissance Combat Vehicle, RFI, which just came out. There's also the BMP-2K upgrade, which has also been going on for a while. So I don't think there's any other country in the world that has the size and scale and the challenge of vehicle upgrade programs that India has today. There is no other country which is trying to do what India, or at least the Indian Army, is trying to do. So it's a massive challenge for the country, and I think it will take us and our Indian partners and the entire supply chain and ecosystem that sits behind that to really get down to the details now and look at timelines and look at whether we can accelerate programs like FICV, which have been going on for a while. But it will take the right kind of commitment from the government. Will they continue to support the Make India program as it's been going on, which is to support 80% of the prototype funding? It's really a question back at them. How will they take it forward? Will they select 2 DAs? Will they ask all 5 of the bidders to submit a detailed project report? Those are questions I think which obviously remain open, and I think it's now time that we look at some of these urgent programs and we take them forward.
Thanks, Nick. One last question from my side to Jan. We talk about transfer of technology, and we often hear maybe criticism that not necessarily the latest or greatest platform is available for co-production or sale, etc., to India. Now, you mentioned you spend 25% of your turnover in R&D in your company. So how do you reconcile that in terms of you're spending billions of dollars of R&D money to develop the platforms that you have? With India being such a big market, what's your thought process in providing the latest and greatest technologies that you have available and share it with the Indian market?
Thank you. I would say that the reason why we have to spend up to 30% of our turnover into R&D is that we see the R&D as such as a sellable product that we are ready to share. If we would spend 5% of the turnover into R&D, probably had to sit on it for a while before we could share it. So for me, R&D and latest technology, it's like a vegetable. It's fresh today, it's old tomorrow. So my short answer on how our view on sharing technology with India, it's we're here to share the technology, whatever. We don't separate first generation, second generation, or third generation to country A, B, or C. So again, whatever our latest technology, we're building it, we're developing it for the global market, for friendly countries, and with countries like India being one of our top 3 priority countries. Of course, we're here, and we see India to be a part of that R&D as well, because we want to develop the R&D in India for our global supply chain.
Thank you, Jan. I think we have time for only a couple of questions from the audience, as I've been prompted by the organizers. So if you have a question for any of the panelists, if you can identify your name, your organization, and who the question is intended for, we'll take a couple questions. Yes,
Thank you, Chair. I'm Major Chakravarti. I'm sorry the mic is not working. I'll try to use my voice and my vocal cords to the best all of you can hear. I'm very lucky to be trained by BAE System and SAAB. And I spent quite a few months over there with both these companies. And my questions are to both of you. Firstly, to BAE, you're making the ultralight howitzer with Mahindra. Do you wish to, what you call, export this system, the ultralight howitzer? And next, any other artillery equipment, are you also trying to, what you call, make in India over here, now that you've got the chance to go on with Mahindra? And the next is, you have a lot of, joint ventures with HAL. We have OFB, and OFB have a great, what you call, infrastructure. Initial plans, at least for one of your BAE Sweden, was to what you call manufacture equipment with OFB. Are you still looking forward for doing things with the OFB? This is one question. And next I have to SAAB, sir. SAAB is very rightly, as you said, you're going to share all your technology with India. Now, what are the fields you're going to share in? Are you going to share in SAM? Are you going to share with aircraft technologies? We have the Scania vehicle, which we have used for a long, long time. I'm trained on it by your company in Södertälje. My instructors are still in touch with me. And I would like to say, they haven't shared anything of the Scania technology till today. Not a penny's worth has come to us. How is this transformation taking place? Is it a personal commitment, or is it a commitment by the company?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, General Chakravarti. Okay, so I think you can hear me, right? Okay, so General Chakravarti, thanks for that question. So I think the question was, what would we be looking to do in terms of the ultralight howitzer? And of course, that's the United States government to Indian government FMS sale. So as part of the FMS contract, which we've talked quite a lot about, in fact, in the open media as well. This is something that we're absolutely committed to. Even before M777, we've got a long-standing legacy here in terms of artillery and air defense guns. We've got a very proud established base in India that obviously dates back to the 80s. With Mahindra, we're going to be doing the assembly, integration, and test with the gun number 25. We've just completed range tables development in Pokhran, and then we'll pick up the next phases of the program through the milestone sort of timelines now on that program. But in addition to Mahindra, AIT, we're talking to several other companies, several other large companies who are sat in this room today, and several other smaller companies as well, MSMEs. It's a really broad range of, if I look at the 38 to 40 Indian companies that we're looking at just for this program. And we've been in discussion with those companies now well through the gestation period of the M777 program, so 9 years. So you dial it back 9 years, and we started having starting those kinds of discussions. And it goes to everything that my colleagues have been discussing here, finding the right fit, finding the right niche capabilities, finding the right ability to scale, not just looking at one program, looking at our global supply chain. So looking at what we could do on M777 in India for the India program. This is for tranche 1, of course. We're looking at future tranches for the Indian Army. And then obviously we're looking at what can we do in India for the world, for M777 requirements, both that feed back into the United States Army for future build, and M777 that could be sold in other parts of the world. So I think that's absolutely the vision, and our vision when it comes to entering into those long-standing, enduring partnerships, like I said, is not related to one program. It shouldn't ever be that myopic. It has to look long-term. It has to look at the global supply chain and looking at what you might do to create a production hub in India for the world. In terms of other artillery programs, yes, we're in very close discussions with the Indian Army and with DGRT on several other programs. And those are quite competitive, and those are quite confidential in nature. I'm happy to have a sort of off-the-record discussion on that, but that's quite confidential between us and the Indian Army, of course, as you would well appreciate. Last question you had on HAL, whether we're looking at OFB. I should have mentioned this. We've actually long partnered with the DPSUs. It's not just HAL, of course. We've got a long-standing partnership with HAL, and we're trying to take that further with capabilities like Advanced Hawk, which we unveiled to the world at Aero India. We actually did the launch of Advanced Hawk with HAL at Aero India for the entire world. And that was done with that kind of vision in mind, what I've discussed today. But we've been partnered with BEL on the light combat aircraft. We've got several systems on the LCA today. We've been partnered with OFB for a long time. We're in discussions with OFB again on several programs, including for artillery programs. We're looking at least one major program in the air defense spectrum. We're discussing ammunition with them. We're discussing ammunition with a few other companies, such as Solar, of course, where we've got some sort of ongoing, sort of opportunities with them as well. So we've got a broad range of, I think, partnership activities that don't limit us to just HAL and Mahindra. If it appears like that, that's not the case. We're actually doing a lot behind the scenes. Thanks.
So thank you for your question, and I'm happy that you've been well trained in Sweden. Giving up on me now, but I'll keep on. So the short answer on your question is yes, we are planning on transferring technology. We are transferring technology. As I mentioned, in the R&D field, for instance, now India is already involved in our next generation submarines, in our Gripen Echo, the latest generation of our fighter system. You mentioned the SAM systems, and yes, already done. If you look at Colonel Bhatia there, he will vote for the fact that if we talk about the V-Shorad system, even though it's not decided yet who's going to be the winner there, we have already started the transfer of production into India, placing orders, actually sourcing from India to Sweden in regards of those SAM systems. And I can also say that I'm not talking for myself. I'm talking about on behalf of my chairman, my CEO, and I have the head of the Dynamics division who is responsible for all the Carl Gustaf systems that we have been producing in the country since 1975, as well as the SAM systems. So definitely I would say yes, we are transferring in. And by the way, Scania is no longer part of our group, so I can't vote for them. So I'm sorry, they are not sharing something.
Thank you so much. I would also, I think, conclude this panel session because of paucity of time, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their excellent comments. I'd like to thank Nitin Gokhale for arranging this very important session, leading lights in the audience, Mr. Shambhu Kumaran from the MOD, and all the people
No,
from
that's fine.
all the
That's fine, that's fine.
uniformed services and defense attaches. So thank you very much.